Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. I'm your host, Dave Vance. Tonight our guest is author, speaker, writer, Paul Engel, a fellow talk show host and founder of the Constitution Study. But first, it's time for announcements and updates. I want to say happy Columbus Day to everybody out there. I for one am glad he made the trip, and I'm glad my ancestors came over here. I'd much rather be in America than any other country in the world, even with all the problems we have. I do want to talk a little bit before we get into the ads about the situation over in Israel. I hate what has happened over there. I hope that Israel is able to effectively destroy Hamas or come to as close to it as possible. But I want to say something about our country here. Our borders are wide open because our government fails to secure them. They refuse to secure our borders. So don't think something like that couldn't happen here. Think about how many military age millions of men have come over here through that open border over the last several years. So don't take it for granted that something like that couldn't happen here. You need to be ready to defend yourself because the cops will show up after the fact. Now it's time for announcements and updates. The Stewart-Henry County monthly meeting of the TFA, originally scheduled for Thursday the 5th of October, was rescheduled for Thursday, October 12th at 7 p.m. The meeting will be held in the enclosed side porch at Mama Mia's in Dover. We will meet there for supper at 5:30 p.m. Our speaker will be retired police officer Larry Hell from Henry County, where he serves as an SRO and reserve officer. As a former police officer from Paxton, Illinois, Larry was involved in a deadly shootout in 1979 that began when a state trooper called for assistance during a four-vehicle traffic stop. When it was over, the trooper was shot dead. His brother-in-law, who was riding with him, was also shot. Larry's partner was killed. Two of the three assailants were also killed. He was shot twice, but was able to neutralize the person that shot the others. He received an award for valor from the Illinois Police Association and a Purple Heart by the Illinois State Police, among other commendations and awards. He is a member of our local TFA, and we are proud to have him. Come and hear his story for yourself and bring a friend whether you're a member or not. The Tennessee Eagle Forum Foundation invites you to join them for the On Eagle's Wings 2023 Conference and Banquet on Saturday, October 21st at the Embassy Suites Hotel, Franklin, Cool Springs. On Eagle's Wings 2023 will feature 12 of the most widely respected speakers addressing some of the most pivotal issues facing our nation today, from the crisis at the border to the waning influence of America around the world, to the impact of failed economic policy at the kitchen table, to the cultural chaos being unleashed by the left. There is a movement afoot meant to uproot and overthrow the traditional conservative way of American life. We promise you will be informed and inspired by the platform of guests they have assembled. So make plans to join them on Saturday, October 21st to hear 12 incredible speakers addressing 12 vitally important issues all in one incredible day. Learn more at tneagleforumfoundation.org. For good conservative talk radio, tune into 105.3 WDXC Radio in Lawrenceburg from 5 to 6 p.m. on Mondays for the Kip Capley Show and Wednesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. for the local GOP radio show hosted by the chair of the Lawrence County GOP, Brandon Taylor, and Lawrence Sutton, the secretary of the Lawrence County GOP. If you want our state to step up and push back on our overreaching, often unconstitutional federal government, visit tncss@weebly.com and learn more about the nullification legislation we hope to get passed this session. There's no cost, it's an informational site, but we would like for you to click on the Substack tab to sign up. We need as many as we can get to show support for this effort. Please talk to your state rep and state senator now and get their commitment to support this very important piece of legislation. Help put some teeth in the tent. Please spread the word. If you have an announcement from a conservative organization you want announced on this show, send the information to tninformer.tv@gmail.com the Friday before the show. Our guest tonight is Paul Engel, another constitutionalist that also lives in Tennessee and is the founder and talk show host of the Constitution Study. He is also an author and speaker. Paul has spent more than 20 years studying and teaching both the Bible and the U.S. Constitution. That experience helps Paul explain difficult concepts in a way most people can understand. As one manager described, Paul can take the most complex idea and explain it in a way my grandmother can understand. Freely admitting that he learned more about our Constitution from Schoolhouse Rock, that's a Saturday morning cartoon us older folks watched, than in 12 years of school, he says that anyone can be a constitutional scholar. Paul can be heard daily on America Out Loud Network and is available for events and interviews. You can reach him at paul@constitutionstudy.com, and his website is constitutionstudy.com. Paul, thanks for joining us tonight. How's everything going?
Well, Gabe, thanks for having me here. So far, everything is good. We're on the top side of the soil, and we still have a lot of our freedoms. We haven't lost them all yet, so we're doing okay.
Still in the fight. We're still in the fight.
That's right.
So tonight, our first topic, and we may get to more, but our first topic is your recent article on executive orders. The title is Executive Orders or Edicts. The Constitution doesn't explicitly address the term executive orders, but does outline the duties and responsibilities of the President in Article 2. What are some of the constitutionally legitimate powers the President has that give him the authority to issue EOs in order to uphold his oath, and who can he issue them to?
Well, the thing is, we've built up a whole mythos about executive orders. Executive orders are nothing new. George Washington issued executive orders. All an executive order is a directive. It's a memo from the president to the rest of the executive branch. And according to Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1 of the Constitution, the president may require the opinion in writing of principal officers in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices. So that actually was President Washington's, the very first EO was President Washington calling on his department heads to give him an update, tell him where things are, what's going on. The problem is, since so few, in my opinion, since so few people actually understand the Constitution, they hear an Obama saying, I've got a pen and a phone and I'm not waiting for the legislature. Or they hear a Biden saying, I'm going to issue a mask mandate or a vaccine mandate. And we assume that they are actually writing orders to people. They're not. They get a little sneaky. They say, well, for example, Biden issued an executive order telling his Department of Labor to establish a regulation to require vaccines for any vaccine mandate for any employer with more than 100 employees. Basically, he ordered his Department of Education to violate the law, to commit a criminal act. But the idea that the president can simply make up stuff with his pen and his phone and write law that way is not true. Even the presidents don't believe that. That's more rhetoric than anything else. The problem is when these executive orders turn into illegal regulations and people follow them.
Well, and they follow them because they think they have to. Like you said, most people don't understand the Constitution, don't understand the history behind it, and they just assume he's the top guy. We always hear he's the most powerful man in the world, and so surely he can tell us what to do. Unfortunately, a lot of people see it that way.
Yeah, they think he's writing edicts. They think he's a sovereign, and he says, thus saith the president, now we shall do this under penalty of death. And it's not the way it works. It's not the way, it's not legal to do that. Now, there's a lot the president can do via executive order. Remember, his primary function is to make sure the laws of the United States are faithfully executed. So an executive order may be, okay, Congress said there's now a law. Well, you were talking about the border earlier. It says Congress said there's a law. We're gonna build a 20-mile section of the wall. Executive departments, here's how you're going to do this. Department of Interior, you're going to do this, and the Army Corps of Engineers, you're going to do that. He's using it to tell his agents how to execute the laws. That is his responsibility. Again, power corrupts. Absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. So when we allow these presidents to get away with the criminal activity they order, they just keep doing it over and over and over again. Kind of like, a spoiled puppy.
So executive orders are basically from the chief executive to the people in the executive department. That's what they should be limited to.
That's all. That is what they're limited to. It's literally no different than a CEO of a corporation sending a memo to all his employees. That's all it is.
So when did our presidents start issuing EOs beyond the powers given to them in the Constitution?
That's kind of hard to nail down. As I said, George Washington issued the first executive order, I believe in 1789, the very first year of the government. We didn't start numbering them until the 1860s. But what's interesting is the very first EO that was numbered was President Lincoln creating a court in the territory of Louisiana, which is real interesting because Congress is given power to create federal courts, not the president. So as far back as 1865, we've seen EOs used to make unconstitutional, to do unconstitutional things.
Okay, basically they've been exceeding their authority since 1862.
Somewhere around there. I mean, there could be others earlier since they weren't cataloged and numbered and logged in the Federal Registry. They're very hard to track down all of those things because it could have been as simple as John Adams going, "Hey Tom, go do this for me. Pick up my cleaning, please." I mean, it could have been as simple as that. But yeah, to me, it's less when did they start? They've always, since the beginning of the Republic, people have tried to found a way around the Constitution and around the law. It's human nature, and people who want power are drawn to government. Therefore, they tend to be the people that are willing to skirt the rules to get what they want.
And so they've been treated like edicts instead of unconstitutional EOs because a lot of people, because of ignorance on the part of the citizens, on the part of Congress, other people in government. Is that pretty much ignorance and or apathy?
Yeah, but what's interesting is if you look at it, like anything else, there's an old saying, the oldest thing is an instant success. So it's little things, and then it kind of hockey sticks. All right. So you think about it. Was it early 1900, 0102? Theodore Roosevelt starts creating national parks. Right? There's nothing about a national park in the Constitution. The federal government is not authorized to own a national park, but he creates it, and nobody says boo. You've got Woodrow Wilson. You've got FDR. All right, and what you see are people saying they push until somebody pushes back, and then they lay low for a while, and then they do it again, and they do it again. Now, what's interesting is in somewhere around the 1950s and 60s, education in this country changed. We stopped, among other things, teaching civics. We stopped teaching the Constitution. So your average American knows less about the supreme law of the land than they do about their favorite reality TV host. So when someone comes along and says, I'm going to issue an EO, I'm going to create a mandate, they think it's real. It's when we were early in our marriage, my wife worked at a bank, and I found it very interesting that working in a bank, they never showed her counterfeit bills. They only showed her real currency, so that when she touched a counterfeit bill, even though she wasn't sure why, she knew it was wrong. We used to do that, right? We used to teach the Constitution. We used to teach not just, in 1870, in 1787, they signed it, and we used to teach what it actually says.
Right.
And therefore, when you encountered something that just didn't seem right, the flags went off. We stopped doing that. I'm not joking when I said I learned more about the Constitution from Schoolhouse Rock than I ever did in 12 years of government-run education. And when I actually sat down and studied the Constitution, the two things that struck me the most was how much I had not been taught in school, but actually how much of what I had been taught was actually wrong.
Wow.
So, it truly is. And that's part of the genesis of the Constitution study, this idea of people getting together in small groups like a Bible study, only you're studying the Constitution, so that we are exposed to these ideas. So, because you have to think about it, the president gets away with this because um, the primary, we talk about checks and balances. We often talk about it between the three branches of the federal government, but we forget there are multiple layers of government. The primary check against these powers is not so much Congress as the states. Yep. Yes, Congress has a check. Yes, the courts have a check. It's the states. It's the state's ability to simply say, no, Mr. President, we didn't authorize you to do that, so we're just paying no attention to it. And we're not going to spend any money on it. We're not going to help you. And, oh, by the way, if you try to use this to take away the rights of our citizens, we'll take all of your agents and put them in jail.
I would love to hear that, and I would actually love to see that. That probably needs to happen a little bit, at least on some level. Another thing, too, even lawyers aren't really taught the Constitution. They're taught court precedent. And I'm assuming that most of our judges, I'm assuming most of them are probably lawyers, so most of what they know about the Constitution is from the precedent that they've studied. So they haven't really studied the Constitution. They've studied what others have said about it. Is that pretty accurate?
That's absolutely accurate. In fact, whenever I encounter a lawyer or a judge, I ask them, when you were in law school, did you study the text of the Constitution or constitutional law? And I've had one man in probably, 5 years now, 4 or 5 years, say he studied the Constitution in law school. They're studying con law, which, as you said, is, it's a judge's opinion. Actually, if you want to be more accurate, it's generally a judge's opinion about another judge's opinion about another judge's opinion about what he wanted the Constitution to say.
Right.
And it's where we get such ridiculous ideas as, my current favorite is this idea of the current understanding of judicial review and the idea of strict scrutiny. Because the whole idea of scrutiny is the idea that the courts can look at an action, look at a law, and say, that was unconstitutional. But the government had a really good reason to do it, so we're going to let it slide. Yeah. So every time you hear of a court case and you hear judicial review, strict scrutiny, intermediate scrutiny, or rational basis scrutiny, you're literally talking about the court saying how hard the government has to work to violate the Constitution and still get away with it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was reading, last week we had Joe Wolverton on, and we were talking about the fact that there's nothing in the Constitution that specifically gives the federal government power over the issue of immigration. It does allow them to regulate naturalization so that we have uniform laws throughout, but nothing in there specifically about immigration. So everything, all the powers that the federal government has in regards to immigration are all built upon the court basically saying they have the power, but they can't point to anything specific in the Constitution that gives them the power.
So it gets even better. Absolutely correct. The power of immigration, of regulating immigration, is not a power delegated to the United States. Therefore, according to the 10th Amendment, that power either resides with the states or with the people. So since it isn't prohibited to the states, it could be to the states if the state constitution authorized it, which most of them do. But there's another point in there that we need to understand, and that is the idea of the supremacy clause, Article 6, Clause 2. Now, this says that the Constitution, there are three things that are supreme law of the land: the Constitution, the laws of the United States made pursuant to the Constitution, and all treaties made or shall be made under the authority of the Constitution, which is established by, under the authority of the United States, which is established by the Constitution. These are the supreme laws of the land. Do you see anything about a judicial opinion in there?
Nope.
No. In fact, it specifically says that the judges are bound to the Constitution, not the other way around. So what you have is you have the federal government saying, we're going to take over immigration. Is it logical to have a national immigration policy? Maybe, but until we give them that power via the Constitution, no matter how good an idea you think it is, it's not legal. But there's another thing that people we don't read, we don't study. Federalist Paper 78. Alexander Hamilton is talking about the powers of the courts, and he said, and I'm going to paraphrase pretty close. He said, "There is nothing more rational than that an act of the government contrary to the Constitution is void. Just any act contrary to the Constitution is void." He says to disagree with that is to say that the deputy is above the master, that the servant is above the master, that the representatives of the people are superior to the people themselves.
And this is coming.
This is Alexander Hamilton, Federalist Paper 78. What's interesting is in the 1800s there are 3 court cases. Marbury versus Marbury versus Madison, ex parte Siebold, and Norton v. Shelby County. In all 3 of them, it clearly states an unconstitutional act is void and as if it never happened. Now, once you get your head wrapped around that and say, wait a second, so Congress said we were going to create immigration laws, but that is unconstitutional. Therefore, it's void. Therefore, it's never happened. Therefore, the states don't have to pay any attention to it.
If they have the backbone to do that, which is the problem.
So you have Governor Abbott in Texas. He's got this one part of the Rio Grande that's a real problem. He sets up these barriers,
right.
And and I kept saying, when Biden would say, take that down, go pound sand. We'll get the courts in it. Go pound sand. We don't care. This is our border too. It's our border before it's your border. Go pound sand. Now the courts did eventually say, listen, the problem we have is where you've put that barrier, it's a hazard to navigation. Can you move it closer to your shore? And I believe Texas said, yes, that makes sense. We can do that. But this idea that the president can simply order Texas to take down that barrier, go away.
Absolutely. And even if it seems like and I will agree, it seems to me like there would be a national policy. But since there's nothing specifically in the Constitution that authorizes them to do that, and I don't think that was an oversight by the founders. I mean, they were pretty thorough. So I don't think it was an oversight. But for whatever reason, it's not in there. Well, when we say, well, it needed to be in there, and we'll just go ahead, they're going to build on that. Well, now they've built on that to the degree that, we control everything having to do with immigration to include we can lead the invasion and you can't do anything about it because the federal government has total control on immigration. So that's, once you let them build on something they're not supposed to have, it's like letting somebody, hey, I'm going to build a little, if it's okay, I build a little shed on your property. Yeah, okay, go ahead. Well, next thing you know, the shed is, it's a 2-room shed. Now it's got a porch. Now it's got a 2nd floor, whatever. So they just build on that. So if they don't have the authority, we don't need to let them get away with it, no matter what the topic is.
Right. It's the, give them an inch, they'll take a mile. If we say, well, it makes sense, so we'll let it go this time, there's nothing to stop them from doing it again. Now, if the American people believe that there's that immigration policy should be uniform across the nation, there's a way to create that. It's called a constitutional amendment.
Yep. And
all you got to do is get 2/3 of both houses to agree, or get 2/3 of the states to call for a convention for proposing amendments, and proposes an amendment. And then if it passes the convention or it passes Congress, get 3/4 of the states to agree that, yes, this should be a federal. But what's interesting is when you do that, if you're smart, you put restrictions. Here's the boundary. Here's how far federal government you can go. Okay, you can set rules for immigration, but you cannot prevent a state from enforcing their border. Or we can have a logical, rational discussion to come up with an amendment that will give them the power they need without giving them so much power that they become even more dangerous. We want to bypass that and just, I have a pen, I have a phone, and we got to do it now.
Right. And back to what you said about Hamilton and Federalist 78. Remember too, as you well know, and I'm saying this is for the audience, some that may not know, that Hamilton wanted a monarchy. Okay, so I mean he was definitely a strong central government type guy, But what he wrote in Federalist 78 was because that's what they had come up with, was that, you know, if it's not in the Constitution, it's void. So that's important. I really think that's one thing that should be taught in the high schools is the Federalist Papers. And I think it would be a good idea to read the Anti-Federalist Papers to see how spot on they were. What's been allowed to happen, mostly because of the ignorance of the people and, you know, actually the corruption of our politicians, which they foresaw. And they even, think about it, after, not long after the Constitution was passed, we had the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were a blatant violation, at least part of them were a blatant violation of the First Amendment. So if the founding generation couldn't be trusted on their own not to try to take more power than they're supposed to have or to ignore our rights, then why would we think 200 some years later that we can trust these people?
Well, you're dealing with humans, and humans are fallen, flawed, and there will always be individuals that think the ends justify the means. On both political sides, by the entire political spectrum, I've encountered people who say the ends justify the means. The problem with that is then you can justify, somebody will justify absolutely everything.
Right.
You talk about Adams, signed the Alien Sedition Acts. They were passed by Congress, which at that point, not only was, the House was elected by the people, the Senate was chosen by the state legislatures. So, you even had the states had a say in this legislation, and 2 states said, you know what, this goes too far. We are not going to enforce. This goes too far. And the other 11 said, no. So 11 of the 13 states were not willing to stand up and say, sorry, Mr. Adams, you can't do that. We've told you can't do that. So too bad. It still takes people, and it still takes our employees in governments in all level to, 1, know what the Constitution says, and then 2, be willing to apply it, and then for the people to back them up when they do it. That's, to me, has been the biggest issue, is a lack of education of the people and of those in government, a lack of holding elected officials accountable, and a lack of people standing with them when they do the right thing and the hard thing, and then they get punched in the teeth about it. People run for the hills.
Yep. Yeah. And of course, a lot of these EOs and federal regulations, they end up in the Federal Register, but that doesn't make them any more constitutional. And of course, that register just grows every year.
Oh, by leaps and bounds, because Congress is lazy, and people who are drawn to power don't like to take responsibility. So what we have is Congress, rather than passing laws, they pass these frameworks, and then they say, well, this department will write a regulation, or this secretary will write a regulation. Those aren't laws. You go back to the Supremacy Clause, the Constitution, the laws of the United States, and the treaties made on the authority of the United States are the supreme law of the land, not the regulations, not the executive orders, not the edicts from on high, not the opinions of a bunch of high priests in black robes. These are the supreme law of the land, and our ignorance of it, the fact that we don't, you talk about the Federalist and Anti-Federalist Papers, we don't read the Constitution. Why do we not read the Constitution in high school? In middle school, it's every state in the union, I believe, has a law that says on Constitution Week, which is generally the week that includes September 17th, the schools will do a module on the Constitution. Fine. What? Again, they talk about it. They 1787, a bunch of rich white guys locked themselves in a room that August, sweated their pants off, and came up with a document. Maybe they quote Franklin when asked, what kind of government did you give us? A republic, if you can keep it, but we're really a democracy. And what they don't do is they don't go and read the document.
Right.
It's 8,000 words. The average person can read it in under 30 minutes.
Yeah. But
we don't. And when you talk about the Federalist and Anti-Federalist, I've got a book project I'm trying to get someone, a publisher, to pick up. What I want to do is I want to do a study of the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers side by side by topic.
That would
What
be
did one
excellent.
side say? What did the other side say? Yeah. Now I just got to get somebody that thinks it'll sell.
Well, hey, that would be great. I mean, I would think, well, if we still had decent colleges, and maybe there is one, maybe Hillsdale or somebody like that would buy something like that. But
Maybe.
so the Constitution study, that's not the one you're talking about. The book that's up there on the screen now, the
No,
Constitution study.
that's the book I wrote. Um, it's kind of a funny story. I said I grew up in public schools, mostly in the 70s. I was ignorant about the Constitution. I was apathetic. I didn't care. And I eventually heard a historian who actually talked about history without putting me to sleep. And I started listening. A gentleman by the name of David Barton.
Yep.
Wall Builders, great site,
Yep.
no affiliation, but they've got some really great content. And during one of their programs, they quoted John Jay, our first Chief Justice of the United States. He said, every member of the state ought diligently to read and study the Constitution of his country and teach the rising generation to be free. By knowing their rights, they'll sooner perceive when they are violated and be the better prepared to defend and assert them. And I realized I had never read the Constitution. So I did. I sat down and I read it. And as I told you, I was shocked by how much I had been taught that was wrong. And I start reading Federalist papers, Anti-Federalist papers. I'm reading this stuff, and I'm becoming that guy, right? I'm becoming the guy that keeps correcting the misunderstandings of the Constitution. And one day I'm driving home from a Bible study at a friend's house, and I'm listening to that podcast, and they were talking about a study done by the First Amendment Foundation in 2013, where they asked people, among other things, to name the 5 freedoms protected by the First Amendment. 36% of the respondents could not name a single freedom protected by the First Amendment, over a third. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. How crazy are we? I mean, even before I started studying, I would have at least gotten 3 of them.
Right.
Why, God, don't we study the Constitution the way my friends and I just studied the Bible? And that's where that came from. It's a Constitution study. Well, I had my first Constitution study, and that's actually a whole separate story. But I was living in upstate New York at the time. I moved to Tennessee. I don't know people down here. I can't get a study going down here. And I get laid off from work. And I've got time on my hands. I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write a book. So what I did is I went through the entire Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, all 7 articles, all 27 amendments. And I read them and I studied them. And then I wrote them in plain conversational English. And that's what I said, you know, I wrote this book. And I ended up having to I couldn't find a publisher who would take it, but it was so important I decided to publish it myself, and that's where that came from. And it is a complete study of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution from just another guy who, plain simple English. My editor would complain, you need to write more formal prose. I'm like, no. If an 18th century farmer can understand the Constitution, I want a 21st century American to be able to understand it. So that's what that is.
Absolutely. And back to what you were talking about John Jay and what he was saying, and essentially it boils down to you cannot stay free and stupid indefinitely. Okay. Eventually you're going to lose. Either you're going to lose your ignorance and keep your freedom, or you're going to keep your ignorance and lose your freedom. One of the two.
We've been talking so much lately in the Patriot community about the loss of rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, unreasonable searches and seizures, deprivations of rights without due process of law. And the answer is right there. Why did John Jay say everyone should read and study the Constitution? He said, by knowing their rights, they'll sooner perceive when they are violated and be the better prepared to defend and assert them. And that is, first of all, that quote has been the founding principle of the Constitution study from the beginning. We want people to read, we want them to study, we want them to prepare to defend and assert their rights. It's also pushed us into the next phase of what we've been doing, which I call the Constitution Study Patriots Program. We've got all these different patriot groups, and they all have their different agendas. You were talking about the Tennessee Firearms Association. They're concerned about the Second Amendment. We talk about 917 Society. They're talking about reading freedom of speech, freedom of the press, on and on. But the biggest problem that I've seen is we actively avoid working with each other. Unless we agree 100%, we won't talk to them. We're forgetting that, all right, 80, 90% of the time we agree we can work together. Now, sometimes it's because of what I believe is a mispremise. There are assumptions about the Constitution that aren't true. Sometimes it's just, not invented here, so it can't be right. I didn't want to create another one of those.
Right.
So what I've done is I've created this Patriots program, which actually is just in 3 parts. The first is the constitutional scholars. These are men and women that are not simply going to read and study. I expect everybody to do some basic reading and studying. This is where people can read and study, but these are also the people that are going to help us develop the next generation of education. Right, so what are the people most interested in? How do we make this work so that what are the people looking for? What do they need? And how do we provide it better? The second is, I call them the committees of correspondence. Samuel Adams created the committees of correspondence to communicate among the patriots in the colonial days. Same thing. We have censorship. How do we communicate so that the different people know what's going on, yet still get around censorship issues? We're still working on the how, but I want something so that when something happens, something happens up in Henry County, Tennessee, I'm not going to hear about it most likely unless there's an avenue of communication. But if I've got people that are communicating, that says, hey, there's something's going on in Henry. Is there anybody out there that can help? Is there somebody that has some education that can help put together a response or a proposed legislation or a lawsuit? I get that frequently. I've helped several people around the country with these things. How do we communicate so that these different groups, rather than butting heads, can find out, okay, hey, you know what? I can help you with that. Somebody over there in Virginia can help with something else. And then the third group is the Minutemen. These are men and women that have decided they've dedicated their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor to protecting this country, to protecting the Constitution, which means they will jump on it. If there's an infringement going on, they'll show up to help protect the rights of the individuals. If there's a court case going on, or if there's a piece of legislation, they'll show up. And because they've gotten some education and we've got some communication, we can help the other groups. We don't have to take over from the groups. We can help these other groups do what they do better. To me, the best part, I just started this back in July, Independence Day week. It starts off with a boot camp. The Patriots program is not wide open. If you want to become a Patriot, you start off going through a boot camp. It's a 1-hour video, and there's a test. But it's basically, okay, here's how we go about doing things. Here's our standards. And here's some tools that you can use right now, today, to protect your rights. I don't care if you've gone Patriot or not. Here's a handful of tools that you can use, and this is how I've used them to protect my rights. And it's about that education, preparation, and the ability to defend and assert our rights that I think will make a difference, not in D.C., right, and not even initially in our state house, not in Nashville, in our counties, in our cities. You start making those changes there, and as we get more and more people doing this, it has a greater and greater impact. And eventually it migrates into the Nashvilles and the Albanys and all the state capitals, even Sacramento, believe it or not. And then once we get changes there, DC takes care of itself.
Right. When do you think that program will be ready?
It's available now. Go to constitutionstudy.com/bootcamp. Oh. You can start now. The Patriots program is still in flux, right? I'm still building some of the stuff. I'm kind of building the airplane while I'm flying it. Right. But you can take the boot camp now. There's a test at the end. If you take the test, if you pass the test, you'll get an invite to join the Patriots program, which will involve initially, it will involve access to these 3 groups, access to Patriot-only content, on the website. I may actually set it up so that the patriots get early access to some of my content before it hits the public spaces. So this is the beginning, which means the people who come in first will have the greatest impact on what this becomes as it continues to grow.
Okay. Well, hey, well, I definitely want to check that out, and I think a lot of other people would be interested as well. I want to get back to the EOs a little bit. Can Congress,
Sure.
and this is kind of tied into this, can Congress delegate lawmaking authority to the executive branch?
No. A lot of people have a lot of words. The answer is no. Article 1, Section 1, Clause 1, the very first legally applicable words of the Constitution says all legislative or lawmaking power is vested in a Congress of the United States. So when Congress gets lazy and says, we're going to create a law, and then the executive branch are going to create the rules, they're derelict in their duty. And those laws are, and to me, those laws, while they're laws, they're hollow, and therefore they should be meaningless. The problem is, again, the courts look at it and say, yeah, but Congress had a really good reason for doing that. Personally, I don't care. But we run into this. How do we? I was just listening to a podcast earlier today. There's a case before the Supreme Court. I don't remember what the citation is, but it really comes down to the question: would Congress write this law and said and? Did they mean and, or did they mean or? And that is literally the oral arguments they were having in the Supreme Court. Is this and an and, or is this and an or? Right? Yeah, that's the foolishness that we're dealing with, rather than saying, you know what, Congress, if you meant it to be an or, it was a really stupid law, you go fix it. The courts are going to try and fix it.
So if since Congress is pretty much inept and we can pretty much count on them to do the wrong thing most of the time, what should states do when the president, attempts to usurp power through EOs and the Congress doesn't put their foot down and now it's on the states? So what should they do?
The legislature should pass a resolution, and or the governor says, excuse me, we did not authorize that. That is not a power delegated to you by the Constitution. No, we will not comply. We will not condone, and if necessary, we will punish anybody who tries to deprive our citizens of their rights. And it's interesting because it's not just the states. Think about it. Do you know who the most powerful law enforcement officer is in your area?
Your county sheriff.
Absolutely. So your county sheriff is elected, not appointed.
Right. And
they take an oath to support the Constitution. But yet how many people have actually talked to their county sheriff? I'm not looking to here. This is me. I'm weird. I understand that. When I moved from upstate New York to Tennessee, I was here a little while, and I set up a meeting with my sheriff. I confused the poor man because he's expecting me to complain about something. I said, no, I want to meet you. I want to know you outside of a campaign. I don't want the first time I talk to you to be you begging me for my vote. So we had a nice conversation. I said, listen, Sheriff, this is what I want. And by the way, I have told this to him. I've used this speech in front of him. This is what I want. When I pick up the phone, or anyone in my house picks up the phone and dials 911, I want to know that your deputy has been trained that their first and primary duty is to protect the rights of everyone involved. It's not to enforce state law, county law, federal law. You protect rights. After you're protecting rights, then we can start talking about the law. He said, absolutely. He said, you train them? He goes, yes. I said, fine. What can I do to help? I said, I'm a constitutional scholar. You want to come in and do classes? I'll be more than happy to come and do classes, and I'll provide all the notes, right? I'll provide all the footnotes so your people can go off and check to see if what I'm saying is true. I said, you need someone to write a position paper. You need someone to stand with you at a press briefing or to go in front of a committee in front of the city. I'll be more than happy to. If you're protecting my rights, I've got your back. And we don't think that way. Now, I think that way for a couple of very important, what I think is it's an important reason, because remember when Biden was going to send around the door knockers, knock on people's door. Did you get your vaccine? Get your vaccine. First thing I did was call up the sheriff, was contact the sheriff and said, hey, if these people show up, he goes, give us a call. We'll trespass them and take them off your property. That's
Good.
what I want. That's
Absolutely.
what I want. But we don't get that because we don't think that way when we are hiring a sheriff or hiring a county legislature or a state legislator or a house member of the House of Representatives or the Senate. We have to think of them as employees.
Yep.
Therefore, they have a handbook. That employee handbook is called the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of, in this case, Tennessee, our state. If the employees aren't following the handbook, it's time to fire them. I don't care if you're a donkey. I don't care if you're an elephant. A pox on both your houses. If you are not doing your job, if you are acting in contrary to your oath, I can't trust you to do anything. I want you out of there.
Absolutely. You wrote an article in March of last year analyzing House Bill 0726 by Representative Halsey, Senate Bill 1092 by Senator Bowling that addressed nullification. The bill will be brought back this session for another attempt. Why, in your opinion, is this bill important?
This bill first of all, nullification gets a bad rap for a lot of reasons. The term nullification kind of has a stigma around it. What we're talking about nullification in this case is not the state of Tennessee telling Congress, no, that law is bad and it's not valid anymore. It's the state of Tennessee telling Congress, this law violates the Constitution. It's not valid here. Right? And the legislation was interesting is most of the legislation actually lays out in a pretty solid constitutional manner the justification for it, saying, listen, the Constitution of the state of Tennessee says that all power is inherent in the people. We are the sovereigns, not the people in Nashville, not the people in Washington, D.C. We established the Constitution of Tennessee and of the United States. We, the people, do ordain and establish this Constitution. We created the federal government through the states. We created the states. The states created the federal government. They gave it certain limited powers. It is the state's job to, among other things, hold those powers in check. This law basically says, listen, if the federal government goes beyond its enumerated powers, we will not fund it. We will not put it into effect here. We say no. And there's actually some interesting, the way they went about doing it. One is they didn't just throw it. This doesn't read like a temper tantrum to me. A lot of this type of legislation is, I'm mad at the other side, so I'm going to throw a temper tantrum. No, there's a lot of justification for the law. And then the law actually puts in place a logical system to actually handle the nullification. In other words, it's not just Governor Lee or whoever saying, I don't like this law, therefore, no. They go through and say, okay, the governor, if it involves executive authority, he can issue an executive order nullifying unconstitutional federal acts. If it's a issue that would be dealt with the state legislature, any member of the General Assembly can introduce a bill to nullify an unconstitutional federal act. A court of Tennessee can render a finding holding null and void an unconstitutional act of the federal government. And again, it isn't limited to federal laws. This would include executive orders or a combination thereof. Even, you'll love this, even we the people, if you get 10 people in your county to sign a petition, the state of Tennessee, the legislature, has to create a bill to nullify what you believe to be an unconstitutional act of the federal government.
10 people? I thought the threshold was a little higher than that.
It's 10 people per county.
Okay.
Right? So any combination of 10, I'm sorry, you're right, it's 10 counties or municipalities.
Okay.
Right? So this was back in March. My mind is
I got you.
Right? And then 2,000, you're right, it's 2,000 registered voters can do it. So it's 10 counties or 2,000 registered voters can say, hey, this is unconstitutional. Let's do something about it. Because how many people are frustrated because the legislature doesn't seem to be doing anything? This puts teeth behind it.
Yep.
And I think, in fact, when I wrote that article, if memory serves, I said, I told my readers and my listeners across the country, take this sample legislation and send it to your state legislature. Say, you should do something pretty much like this. This is a pretty good starting point.
Absolutely, and we are hoping to get that through this year. And it won't necessarily get through in the current form. Always, I mean, they may decide the number 2,000 is too low in terms of citizens petition or whatever the case might be. But we've got to have something. And back to justification and constitutionality for just a second. The 10th Amendment would have no meaning, number one, if we take the traditional or the current understanding of the Supremacy Clause. It would make the 10th Amendment meaningless, as well as the 9th. The other thing is, it's kind of like, and I think I said this last week as well, it's an implied task that your state is going to push back when the federal government overreaches. I mean, if you're relying on Congress to push back on the president every time, or even the courts to push back on the president, or the courts to push back on Congress, that's not going to happen. That was not the intent. The reason we have these, it's an implied task that the states stand up and say no. It's insane to think that it would be any other way. And if that's what those guys spent all that time hashing out, basically just to put a bunch of words on the paper that had no meaning. Because if the states are not going to step up, the 9th and 10th are useless.
You're absolutely right. What's interesting in a lot of the places I'm speaking and people I'm talking to is, again, our misunderstanding. Do you remember when George W. Bush signed the Patriot Act, and he created a signing document? He says, I think this is unconstitutional, but I'm going to let the courts deal with it. Right? To me, that's an impeachable offense. That's a dereliction of duty. He took an oath to support the Constitution, yet he's signing a law he thinks is unconstitutional, and he kicks it over to the courts. Right? Because we've all been taught that the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of what the Constitution says, except that's not true.
Right.
So read the Constitution. If you read the debates, if you read the debate of the Constitution's a compact. A compact is just a contract between sovereign entities. So it's an agreement between the states. That means when it comes to understanding it, it falls under contract law. Now, under contract law, when there's a disagreement about the meaning of any part of the contract, it is the parties to the contract that define the meaning. So, in this case, it's not the Supreme Court, which is a creation of the Constitution, that defines what the Constitution means. It is the states.
Yep.
But the states have been bribed into cowardice, and they're so afraid of losing their federal lucre that they don't want to stand up to the federal government because they're afraid. Who was it that just filed a lawsuit? A state filed a lawsuit because Biden threatened some of their federal funding if they didn't comply with some executive order or something like that. And it actually went. It's actually I want to say one of the district courts found it said no, you can't do that. But I'm going off of memory, which I don't always trust.
Okay. Now, we talked a little bit earlier before the show, and you did a great analysis of this bill, a very thorough analysis, and we're not going to have time to cover it as thoroughly as I'd like today, so you've agreed, and I appreciate it, to come back on before session, and the whole show will be devoted to your analysis of this bill. We'll break it all down and give everybody a thorough explanation so that before session, everybody understands what this bill is about. And I would encourage everybody right now, if you go, well, I'm sure it's on your website, but I've got the link, I think the link is posted on our website. It was written under the News with Views paper, or I guess.
You can get it. you can, yeah, I know you get a lot of my stuff with news reviews. Just go to constitutionstudy.com.
Right.
It's the name of it is One State Makes a Plan for Nullification. It's actually article number 360. So if you just, go in there and search for 360, you'll find it. It's One State Makes a Plan for Nullification. The text is there. There's a video. So if you want to, watch it rather than read it, it's there. Not only am I happy to come back and explain it in non-legalese, but I'd encourage every citizen in the state of Tennessee to be in contact with your House rep and the senator and saying, this is important.
Absolutely.
Legislating is the act of compromise, but this is important because what this does is it restores the teeth as much through education as the legislative power. The legislative power is there for the most part. It's the education to tell Governor Lee and all the legislators, all the senators, you have this power. We expect you to use it to protect our rights.
Well,
and we need to make this a requirement of, if you want to get reelected, you need to start protecting our rights, and this is how.
Absolutely. And on that, now, to their credit, they passed a resolution in October of 21, and this was during all the COVID garbage that was going on. The House and Senate, they passed a joint resolution that's basically said, look, we are a sovereign entity. Anything other than your enumerated powers have no effect here, and we reserve and I'm paraphrasing here, we reserve the right to nullify federal legislation that's unconstitutional, and we are not limited to just court action. So they already know they have the power to do this, the right to do this, and the responsibility to do this. But we needed them to go beyond just a resolution and put some teeth in the 10th here in Tennessee. So if you get pushback from your rep or your senator, say, well, wait a minute. Especially if they were in office in 21, and a lot of them that were in office in 21 are still in office now. And there was only a handful, especially on the GOP side, that did not sign this. Now, the governor didn't approve it, but it doesn't matter. There's only a handful. Practically all of them have already said they believe in nullification and not limited to court action. So now we got to have them put their money where their mouth is and pass this legislation.
Put teeth in the 10th.
Absolutely.
That's a movement name, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hashtag that. Put teeth in the 10th. But you're right. And what I like to do is ask the elected official. You took an oath, right? And in that oath, you were required by law, by the Constitution, to swear an oath on your oath to support the Constitution, to swear or affirm to support the Constitution of the United States. This is what the Constitution says. Are you telling me you're not going to do that? Oh, you're not going to keep your oath. You lied to me. Of course, then again, how can you tell when a politician is lying? Their lips are moving, yeah. Which to me says more about the American people than anybody else. Because my line to another weird thing, when I moved down here, I set up a meeting with my state rep and my state senator, and I brought my daughter along. She was 16 at the time, and we sat down in their office and we talked to them. This is what I expect. What are the issues you're interested in? But my standard is, you took an oath. If you're not going to fulfill that oath, if you're going to lie to me, then how can I trust you? I wouldn't trust you to babysit my daughter. Or she was 16 at the time. But I wouldn't trust you to watch out for my daughter. I wouldn't trust you to give her driving lessons. Why would I trust you with my rights? And that's my litmus test. Anybody that comes looking for my vote, my first question is, show me when you fulfilled your oath to support the Constitution when it cost you something. Right? Yeah. Tell me that, the Republican Party platform. No, that's like immediate disqualification. If you give me a political statement, gone. No, you don't understand the question. What did you do? Now, sometimes we'll say, hey, I raised my right hand. I took an oath. I went to war. I patrolled the streets. I did something to protect people's rights. I'll give you a shot. But until we start treating these people as employees with expectations that are what the Constitution says, not how much you're going to bribe me with, this isn't going to change.
I like what you said about, can I trust you with my rights? That should be the first question we ask everybody running for office. Can I trust you with my rights? And then
Absolutely.
if they've been in office for a while, well, okay, what proof can you show me that I can trust you with my rights? Well, I'm looking forward to having you back on. And like I say, when we have you back on, that will be the only topic we go into. Now, there's a new hot topic that you touched on your one of your publications today that I want to hit real quick. The introduction of the draconian carbon passport that could be affecting travel this holiday season. What's the latest information on that?
So that was one of the news sections. So one of the things I've started doing on the website is news items that I find interesting, that I consider from the radio program or whatnot. You can now find a feed on my website to follow that. That's one of those. And that is, remember we had the COVID passport and the idea of having to show your papers to live your life. Well, do you really think that the totalitarian tyrants, the Marxists of this world have forgotten that? There's a reason why we've got, it's the new COVID. It's the election variant. They're looking for any excuse to come up with a passport because a passport is a method of controlling people.
Yeah.
There's a reason why in the Soviet Union, every citizen was issued a passport. And every citizen had to carry that passport and had to show that passport to enter, to cross even states within the Union. They had to show a passport. Right? So exactly, this is the nonsense. Now, this is the stuff where people need to grow a spine, right? When they signed the Declaration of Independence, the 39, I think it was 39 men, no, 56 men who signed the Declaration, swore to each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. If we wish to remain the land of the free, we're going to have to become the home of the brave again, which means we're going to have to learn how to stand up to tyrants and government actors. And this is my own personal example. I've got a couple of them. Back when COVID started, I was doing a book fair in a neighboring county. The name will remain hidden to protect the guilty. Literally days before the event, the county passed a mask mandate. So I show up. It was outdoors, so I set up my table and my tent and my books, and the organizer comes by and says, "Oh, great, this is great, Paul. We're so glad to have you. Oh, by the way, the county just passed a mask mandate. We're on private property, so we should be okay, but we're next to a public road, and we don't know what the police are going to do." My response was, "I don't care. That mask mandate's illegal. I will not follow it." And I handed her a piece of paper I put together for that, just such a situation. And it had the supremacy clause. It had all the constitutional rights that would be violated by a mask mandate or a vaccine mandate or any of that nonsense. It had Federalist 78, right? This law is void. It also, by the way, had Federal Law 18, Title 18 United States Code, Section 242. It is a federal crime to knowingly deprive someone of a right protected by the Constitution and laws of the United States. I said, so here's all the proof, which means if the police do show up and they try to make me take away my liberty to live my life the way I see fit, to take away control of my body, to deprive me of these without due process of law, they're committing a federal crime, which means if you do take me into custody, my first call is to my lawyer, my second is to the FBI, my third is to the U.S. Attorney's Office, my fourth is to each and every media outlet I can find with your name, your badge number, and video proof of your crime, which is punishable, by the way, by a fine up to 1 year in jail. Oh, excuse me, sir. If you even threaten to reach for that taser or that sidearm, that's now a fine and 10 years in jail. How would you like to proceed?
That's
now,
great.
They didn't 50-50 shot. I'm going to jail that day. But what are my rights worth? What are my daughter's rights worth?
Yeah.
If we don't have people, only 3% of the people in the colonies actually fought for freedom, fought for independence. If we don't find 3% of Americans that are willing to stand up and fight back for their rights, I don't mean initiate violence. I mean willing to stand and just say no. We're not this is not I'm not doing this. And here's my proof. No. Then we're not brave. We're cowards, and we're not the land of the free anymore. And we should stop. We should just axe those lines out of the national anthem because they're a lie.
Absolutely, that's the cold hard truth. Well, hey, it's really enjoyed having you. I've really enjoyed having you on the show tonight. Just great information. I look forward to having you back. If you'll just stay with us, I've got to sign off here, but I want to thank everybody else for watching. And if you enjoyed the program, please hit the like button and subscribe. Join us next week when our guest will be State Representative Chris Todd from District 73. He's going to talk about some of the Second Amendment legislation during the special session and what we can expect in the upcoming session. Thanks again for being with us, and we'll see you next week. Good night.